Blog Talk Radio.
Welcome to our program on Kardec Radio.
Welcome to the messengers in our home. Hello, dear Kardec Radio listeners, and welcome back to the messengers in our home. Tonight we're going to talk about Chapter 18, Information and Explanation. Hello, Mackenzie.
Hi, Francisca. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to another chapter of The Messengers in Our Home.
So let us now close our eyes and elevate our thoughts to the higher spheres. Dear Mother, Father God, Creator of the universe and of our yet small hearts, we thank you so much for the gift of life that you have given us and for all opportunities we have to learn and to grow towards you. We thank you for learning more, getting information and explanation from the spirits and the spiritual realm, so we can remember what life really is about and prepare ourselves for our return one day. God, please give us the courage and strength to continue our inner reform day by day and to get to know ourselves even better, so that our hearts and minds can be transformed towards love and giving and peace. We would like to thank the good spirits, Kardec Radio, for their constant support and understanding. And now we would like to start our meeting. So be it. So let us now listen to the reading of Chapter 18. Enjoy.
Chapter 18, Information and Explanations. Ismalia's return to the circle of conversation kept us from continuing the matter. Perhaps, taking advantage of the opportunity, Aniceto asked Alfredo, "How do you feel about our continuing our journey now? We thought we might still make it down to the Earth's surface today." Alfredo gave us a meaningful look and said, "I don't feel I have the right to interfere with your plans, but I think it would be better if you spent the night here. Our instruments are indicating the approach of a large magnetic storm for today. Bloody battles are being fought down on the earth, and people who are not in the actual line of fire are nonetheless in the line of words and thoughts. Those who are not actually fighting in the battles of war are nonetheless involved in the combat of ideas by discussing the situation. Very few men and women are striving to cultivate a higher level of spirituality. Thus, it is only natural that all across the planet, thick clouds of mental residue from inattentive incarnates are intensifying, and this, in turn, increases their afflictions. Aniceto was listening attentively. "I'm not concerned about you in particular," continued Alfredo, addressing our instructor, "but I believe these two friends would be in for an unpleasant surprise." "You're right," agreed Aniceto. "I value the sacrifice our fellow spirits are making in the work of preserving human health." "They are indeed fine workers," said the lord of the castle. "From time to time, I personally visit the centers where they are performing their holy work. Humankind seems to prefer the condition of remaining a child forever. It builds and tears down the treasures of civilization as if it were playing with doll houses. Our friends are working very hard so that magnetic storms, invisible to the human eye, do not emit lethal vibrations that would result in the spread of countless epidemics and the miseries of war. The spirit colonies of Europe, especially those of our level, are suffering bitterly to meet everyone's needs. We have already begun to receive scores of discarnates as a consequence of the bombings. Because it is involved with its own mission, Nosolar still cannot imagine all the effort that the world conflict has been demanding of our work in the lower realms. The aid stations of several colonies linked to ours are overcrowded with Europeans who have discarnated under violent circumstances. We have been notified that prayer petitions from Europe have rent the angelic hearts of the highest level co-workers of our Lord Jesus Christ. Following the terrible bombings of England, Holland, Belgium, and France, there were others no less extensive. After our spirit mentors had met several times, they decided to transfer at least 50% of the war's discarnates to our New World centers. There are more than 400 right here in our own holding area. But isn't it difficult to aid such people? Asked Aniceto in a grave voice. And what about the language issue? Although the aid work in Europe has been intense, it has been very well organized here, explained Alfredo. For each group of 50 discarnates, the Old World colonies provide us with one nurse instructor, with whom we can communicate directly. That way, the problem is not so severe, because our part in this collaborative effort consists only in having to furnish service personnel and relief supplies. But wouldn't it be fairer, asked Vicente, for discarnates of this sort to be kept in the actual areas of conflict? Alfredo smiled and explained. Our highest ranking instructors are of the opinion that such gatherings would be fatal to incarnate spirits as a whole. They would establish pestilential focal points of transcendent origin with unpredictable results. Huge numbers of our brothers and sisters who lose their bodies in the devastated areas are unable to escape from the field of death. However, in accordance with our housing quotas, all who show that they are capable of being transferred here are removed from those areas right away, so that their tormented thoughts will not weigh too heavily on the vital resources of the stricken regions. Aniceto broke in. The countries of the world will return to massacring each other needlessly. The error of one nation will influence all the others, just as the wailing of one man would disturb the peace of millions. Neutrality is a myth and isolation is a fiction of political pride. Just like billions of other planetary families in the infinite universe, earthly humankind is a family of God. War needlessly causes discarnation en masse, and the individuals who die as a result of war will weigh on the spiritual welfare of the whole earth. As long as there is discord among us, we will pay a grievous price in sweat and tears. War deludes the minds of all peoples, including a large number of centers in the invisible realms. Those who do not take up arms of destruction still use words and ideas of destruction. But all of us will pay our dues. The divine law says that we are to understand and love one another. Everyone will suffer as a result of forgetting that law, but each person individually will be held responsible for the amount of discord he or she has personally brought to the worldwide family. Alfredo seemed to be seriously contemplating these ideas and remarked, "That is only just." Aniceto remarked once again after a longer silence, "Last week I visited Alvorada Nova, a spirit colony in a higher realms, and I learned that at the first declaration of war, advanced centers of higher spirituality from neighboring planets established maximum security measures at the vibrational borders they share with us. Our esteemed neighbors have taught us that we must bear on our own shoulders the weight of the entire production of the evil we cause. In other words, we are obliged to do our dirty laundry in our own quarters." We all smiled at this comparison. Ismalia had remained silent, despite the deep emotion stamped on her face, but she now remarked politely,
Unfortunately, in the collective sense, we are still like the Jerusalem of old, enslaved to error. Every day, Jesus heals us, and every day we lead him to the cross. Our deeds are reduced to nothing more than recurring failures. We haven't left the training stage of experience, and unfortunately, we continue to practice politics according to the Caesars, jesting according to the Pilates, religious faith according to the Pharisees, priesthood according to the rabbis of the Sanhedrin, belief according to the Jairus, who believe in doubt at the same time, and business according to the Ananiases and Sapphiras. At this step, we cannot foresee the full range of implications of critical events.
Enthusiastic about these explanations, I ventured to say, "But how atrocious destruction by war is!" "Yes, but at times like these," Alfredo observed, "prayer is an intense light in the hearts of men and women. It is so true that the stars shine brighter on moonless nights. You should know that in order to start making arrangements for receiving desperate discarnates, I have gone more than once to help with assistance work in Europe. A few days ago, some friends and I went on such mission to the skies over Bristol. German bombers were flying over that noble English city. The scene of destruction was frightful. In the dead of the night, however, a beam of intense light stood out to our spirit sight. Its rays flashed in the firmament while the bombs hurled to the ground. The head of the expedition suggested that we descend to the source of that luminous beam. I was surprised to find that we were in a church. The sanctuary might have seemed almost dark to human eyes, but it was very bright to ours. Some brave Christians were there, singing hymns. The minister of the worship service read a passage from Acts, where Paul and Silas were singing at midnight in prison, their clear voices rising up to heaven in notes of fervent trust. While bombs were bursting outside, these disciples of the gospel were singing, united in a celestial vibration of living faith. Our leader told us to remain standing before these heroic souls who brought to mind the early persecuted Christians as a sign of respect and recognition. He also sang along with the hymns and told us afterward that city administrators might construct anti-aircraft shelters, but these Christians were building anti-darkness shelters. Sometimes, he concluded, it is necessary to suffer in order to understand the divine blessings. Translator's note: Alvorada Nova means literally new dawn. So as we come from last week's chapter, Alfredo's love story, we know that Ismalia had left the conversation, right? They were talking and Ismalia went elsewhere to do some work. And then meanwhile, they were talking about Alfredo and how he lived with Ismalia and what was his story with her, why she's much better spiritually speaking than he is at the moment. So he finalizes by saying that, well, he didn't rob anybody, he didn't kill anybody, but he poisoned himself, and that's why he needs to be where he is for a while, separated from her and doing his work, and she is doing her work where she lives, and she comes back to visit him from time to time so that she can help him with what he's doing and give him help so that he can keep going with his work and so on. So, and then that's more or less where we left last week, and then that's why this chapter starts as it starts, with Ismalia returning to the circle of conversation. So she went, left for a while, they talked, and now she's coming back, and we're gonna during the chapter, and we already heard the reading of the chapter, we're going to see that she talks to us, right? Well, she talks to them, she explains something to them and to us, and she is very brief, very succinct, but she says a lot in what she when she intervenes. But let's allow ourselves to go through the chapter, and then when she speaks, we go back, and then we're going to talk and discuss a little bit about what she teaches us, or she tells us. So when they come back, when she comes back, they decide not to keep talking about what they were talking. That was Alfredo's love story with her and so on. So they decide to change the subject, and Aniceto comes and then asks Alfredo, because naturally Aniceto is there with Andre and Vicente, and they want to keep going with their trip. But now they're spending a time with them there at the castle, at the aid station. But he wants to go, right? He wants to keep following his journey, or their journey. So he asks, "What about if we can, just move on and keep going? Let us continue our journey. We can still reach the Earth's surface today." And Alfredo looks at him and maybe a little worried about what's going on at that moment. And then he says, "Well, you have your free will. We don't have the right to interfere with your plans. However, I think that it would be better if you spent the night here." What is interesting here, the first comment on this, is that naturally if he wanted to go, if Aniceto wanted to keep going, to keep walking or volitating towards Earth, he could do it, right? He is a spirit that knows what he's doing, knows what he's capable of, and he has his own will to decide whatever he chooses. However, being naturally of the level that he is, he also likes to hear about what the other person wants to explain, and naturally he will choose between the options or among the options that he is presented with. And since Alfredo tells him that it would be better if you spent the night here, he decides naturally to stop and listen to what Alfredo wants to tell him. And then he explains that their instruments are indicating the approach of a large magnetic storm for today. Naturally, this magnetic that he's speaking here is not of the magnetism, the physical magnetism of the magnets that we have, or the electric currents, right, that can also transform or be felt as a magnetic field. So he is naturally not talking about these magnetic fields that Earth can produce and produces. So he's talking about a different type of magnetism. And what is this type of magnetism, or this magnetic storm? He says that bloody battles are being fought down on the Earth, and people who are not in the actual line of fire are nonetheless in the line of words and thoughts. So it's basically, what he's saying here is that Earth is on the Second World War, right? So everybody now is connected mentally. Some of them who were incarnated, or some of us who were incarnated at that time, were fighting, actively fighting with guns and going from country to country. But other who were not fighting physically were in the line of words and thoughts. And he goes on, right? Those who are not actually fighting in the battles of war are nonetheless involved in the combat of ideas by discussing the situation. So the mental atmosphere, right, of the Earth at that specific moment was very, very heavy, or very, very dense. And maybe at that time, when they were trying to go to Earth, something was happening. Maybe a huge battle, maybe a lot of discussion, and then there's this magnetic storm of thoughts that people were having, and usually bad thoughts and talking about bad situations instead of praying or of talking about good things, talking about on how to improve life and so on and so forth. We could come up with a lot of different examples here. And then he goes, very few men and women are striving to cultivate a higher level of spirituality. So once we know this, once we already understand that our thoughts have energy, right? Once again, I keep repeating this, but I never think it's enough. There's a whole chapter in No Solar, the first book of this series that we are studying right now, where the minister Veneranda, she talks about the power of thought, and she discusses and she gives us a lot of ideas and explains very simply on how our thoughts are powerful in creating these mental images, or this mental atmosphere around ourselves. So imagine the world thinking bad thoughts, right? So unfortunately, as repeating what he said, Alfredo is saying here, very few men and women are striving to cultivate a higher level of spirituality. The question to ourselves is, once we have a bad situation happening, let's say an attack in our city, or an attack in a different city, or I don't know, a very bad news that came from that we read and that everybody is talking about. what is our mental attitude towards that situation? How do we behave once we see or hear these news? Do we try and do we strive, right? Do we really put our efforts on cultivating a higher level of spirituality, meaning of doing a prayer or of reading a good book or of changing the subject, maybe even discussing the subject, but not putting a tone of pointing to the downsides, but actually thinking on forgiveness, right? On the right action. What should we do, right? How can I promote peace instead of sending hate thoughts towards those people, right? And sending love thoughts, right? Sending and asking our guides and their guides to help them, to help those people who suffered, so on and so forth. So it is interesting that over and over, and it doesn't even need to be in a spiritist book as we are seeing right now. And remember, this book was written in the 1940s. But there were books prior to this talking about this, books after this talking about this, and we still keep cultivating lower level of spirituality once we start talking to other people. So unfortunately, and then he finalizes by saying that thus it is only natural that all across the planet thick clouds of mental residue from inattentive incarnates are intensifying, and this in turn increases their afflictions. So although we want to be happier, although we want that these things don't happen again, we only provide more fuel to the fire instead of providing less oxygen, putting a little bit of water, cooling down the temperature so that the fire spreads less quickly, right? Increasing the humidity of the situation. No, we dry it out. We put more gas on the fireplace. And how do we want this not to happen if we don't cultivate a higher level of spirituality? That's what Alfredo is inviting us to think about here. So it is our duty, one of our duties, to not to be positive 100% of the time if I am not there yet, is to strive to cultivate a higher level, right? To really put our efforts on doing this at all times. So once he says that, Aniceto that was listening, probably everybody was listening to it attentively. Well, Andre says it there, right? And then Alfredo comes back and says, well, having said that, and I'm quoting here, I'm not concerned about you in particular. Well, he was probably looking at Alfredo. But I believe these two friends would be in for an unpleasant surprise. So Alfredo was actually worried about Andre and Vicente. Why? Because Andre and Vicente are more attuned to what we are here, right? They are spirits who are in our level. They were living on the earth. They had a lot of problems when they were incarnated. We already know their stories, right? And they're striving to do their best. However, they know, and Aniceto and Alfredo know, that they will not be able to handle the situation. Aniceto has a lot of experience. He already knows what to do. He is already prepared to face the situation, but Vicente and Andre are not. So Aniceto says, you are right. And then that's how he decides, well, we're not going tonight. We're staying here with you, and let's see how things unfold and when we will be able to keep going and to perform our duties. And then Aniceto keeps saying, right, that I value the sacrifice our fellow spirits are making in the work of preserving human health. What is he talking about here? he is actually referring to those few men and women who strive to cultivate higher level of spirituality. Right? And also Andre and Alfredo. Andre and Vicente. Because they are sacrificing themselves. They really want to do this. They really want to go and help, right? Help to increase the health and preserve the health of the human beings. However, they know, Alfredo and Aniceto, and we know because we are reading and studying here, that they are not prepared, right? We just saw how Andre describes that once they start to get closer to the aid station, how heavier, right, they felt, and that the air or the ambience, right, the atmosphere was getting heavier and heavier, and it was much harder for them to keep going as they were doing before. Why? Because before it was clean, there was no mental bad atmosphere. But then once they start getting closer and closer to the atmosphere that surrounds that castle, where a lot of spirits are there because of the mental residues that they emit, the mental atmosphere becomes heavier and heavier. So if they were having troubles with that, can you imagine, based on the situation that Alfredo just described? So it is natural that Aniceto will say, no, okay, that's fine. I value their sacrifice, so let's stay the night and let's see what happens from here. And then Alfredo keeps talking, and then he started talking a little bit about the situation on Earth, and he explains a little bit more about those magnetic storms that we were just talking about. He talks a little bit about, unfortunately, right, about the deaths and the bombings, and unfortunately all the bad situations that were happening at that time, and that unfortunately also still happen these days, right? Not as big as during the World War II, but still big, right? And since we are in this age where information just like flies around, it doesn't matter where it happens. We know that it happened almost immediately after, right? We have people with phones, with cameras, with microphones everywhere, and we know everything that's happening. We have correspondents all around the world. So if during World War II it would, I don't know, it could take like a week to get news, or not even this. Today it's even, we see it live. We basically see it happening. So imagine how tough can it be for the world, right? For ourselves, with all these thoughts at the same time, thinking about these bad things and not praying, for example, or not emitting good thoughts. So what he is talking about here is that, unfortunately, during this time, with this amount of people dying, it is really, really bad. Bad for the planet physically, bad for the cities, the astral cities, the cities on the spiritual realm, like Nosso Lar, like Alvorada Nova, like this aid station, other spiritual cities around the world, to receive all these spirits that are dying. And they are very, very busy, we can say, right? Once these groups of spirits start dying, all of a sudden, in large groups of people dying and dying and dying. So it is unfortunate that we, and he says this here, that humankind, right, seems to prefer the condition of remaining a child forever. So not as a child, as resembling a child when Jesus says that those who resemble a child will have a place in the kingdom of heaven. But as a childish behavior, human being an adult with a child behavior, right? Not worrying about anything, right? Not just like he says here, it builds and tears down the treasures of civilization as if it were playing with doll houses, right? Not caring about the lives of other people, right? If a child, gets a Barbie or any kind of doll and then takes the arm off, okay, it's a doll, right? We need to show the child, be it a girl or a boy, that we don't do that, right? We don't need to do that. I know it doesn't hurt and so on, but it's a representation of, it can be a representation of a real person. But it's still a doll. It's just a toy. But once we start playing with people's lives all around the world, then things starts to become really, really serious, right? So it was very bad. And then he says, close to the end of this paragraph, he says, in quote, after our spirit mentors had met several times, they decided to transfer at least 50% of the war's discarnates to our new world centers. So naturally, all these colonies, all these spiritual cities are talking because they all feel the same, well, not exactly the same, but they feel the pressure, right, of these mental vibrations. And since they are there to help, why not try to help if they can help? So they talk among each other, just like cities talk with each other, and countries, discuss things so that they can have trades and they can help each other with this or with that situation, education or industries and so on. Here's the same thing. So they decided to talk to the spirit colonies, to the spirit cities over Europe, where basically at this time the war was raging, was worse. The worst part, well, he says England, Holland, Belgium, and France, for example, and naturally Germany and Austria and so on. So they said, well, if we can help, we are here to help. And then that's where they say we have a lot of spirits coming to this side so that we can help. And then Niceto said, well, but isn't it difficult to aid such people? It is a fair question, right? How do you do it? Because, well, there's the language problem, there's the all the hurt, all the pain. How do you do it? What can we actually do? How can we help these people? And Alfredo keeps saying, well, it's an intense work in Europe, but it's been very well organized here, right? For a group of people, the colonies of the old world provides a nurse instructor, so we can communicate with her, and then we can solve all problems. So when we have everything organized, the problem is not so severe. It needs effort, it needs time, but we can do it. It's manageable. And that's one of the most important things, right? Once we want to help, and that's what I take from this, once we want to help, we will not stop and decide not to help because of the difficulties. If we want to help, we will see that it's difficult, or it may be difficult, but we will find a way of doing it. However, if we want to use an excuse and not help, first, I don't ask. And second, if I am asked to help, I will say, well, I have no time. Well, I can't do it because of this. I can't do it because of that. So it can be an excuse or it can be a real justification. However, we really need to pay attention to what we are feeling inside, because that's what counts. So what Alfredo is saying here is very, very important, and we can clearly see how hard and how how much he is really trying to do his job. And remember, he said that before. I am really striving because my goal is to climb a step in the stairs so that I can deserve to be together again with the one that I love, with Ismalia. So he is doing his part. And naturally, the whole aid station is together with him trying very, very hard, making a large and big effort, a collaborative effort to help these spirits that are coming from the old world to the colony that he is. And remember, we are talking about only one colony, but there are a lot of other cities around and, around the earth that were doing the same thing. And this today, also the same thing. Lots of other cities, lots of other no solars, quote unquote, here around the world doing the same thing that they were doing. And then Vicente interrupts and says, but wouldn't it be fairer for the scarnets of this sort to be kept in the actual areas of conflicts? So what he's saying is, what do we have to do with all the problems that they are creating? And isn't this like more or less how we see the world? Well, they have their problems there. Why don't they keep their problems there? And then Alfredo smiles and explains, and this is really tough on us, really tough on us. And I'm going to read because it is very, very important. And later on, Aniceto will be even tougher on us. And then this is Alfredo saying, quote, our highest ranking instructors are of the opinion that such gatherings would be fatal to incarnate spirits as a whole. They would establish pestilential focal points of transcendent origin with unpredictable results. Huge numbers of our brothers and sisters who lose their bodies in the devastated areas are unable to escape from the field of death. However, in accordance with our housing quotas, all who show that they are capable of being transferred here are removed from those areas right away, so that their tormented thoughts will not weigh too heavily on the vital resources of the stricken regions. So, what Alfredo is telling us here is, and then end quote, right? So what Alfredo is telling us here is, okay, here is the first thing that you need to know, that we need to know. If we can separate a group of these spirits who are all together making a huge mess because of their mental vibration, it will be good not only for them, but it will be good for all of us. Because the more concentrated it is, it can affect more and more people. So what they do is they take a little bit of those spirits, and so that we can treat them separately without having all of them together, creating that huge mess of bad mental vibrations. And after that, what he is telling us and reminding us is, since we have the ability of doing this, why wouldn't we do it? What would be our excuse for not having them, for not having those who can be transferred, removed from those areas, so that their thoughts would not make those regions even worse than what they really are at that moment. So it is a first strike on our thoughts on, okay, let's take some of those refugees, right? Those people who are trying to escape from a very bad situation. If we can, if we have the ability of doing so, we have the moral how can we say, we have the moral obligation to take those people, right? We never know what can happen to us. We never know if we will one day need to be taken as a refugee for a while due to any kind of circumstances, right? As you all know, I live here in the United States, right? I live in a region where, fortunately for us here, there has not been a huge problem. I mean, that, I don't know, hundreds or thousands of people were displaced of their homes. But a few years ago, we had a huge hurricane, right, in the New Orleans area, where a lot of people were without their homes. And we think that this can only happen far away from us, that this can only happens in Europe, this only happens in Africa, in South America. It never happens here. And then when it happens, what can we say, right? Who will take us as a refugee, or who will be able to help us? So there's no excuse for us not to take them if we can. But Alfredo is still very light on his comments. Aniceto actually goes deeper, and he really strikes us when he says, the countries of the world will return to massacring each other needlessly. The error of one nation will influence all the others, just as the wailing of one man would disturb the peace of millions. Neutrality is a myth, and isolation is a fiction of political pride. So in 1944-45, when this book was written, Aniceto is already talking about globalization, that when we isolate each other, when we isolate from each other from a different country, as all these limits, or my country goes up to this point and then your country starts, this isolation is a fiction of political pride. Oh, this is my nation, this is your nation. We all know that this is, quote unquote here, needs to be like this. But we have to remember that once a very bad situation hits, everybody is together. These limits need to be undone. I remember that a while ago, reading about Neil Armstrong, the first man who put his feet on the moon in 1969, he says at one point in his life that one of the things that he most impressed him when he was flying around the earth was that he was not able to see the limits that separated the countries. He could not see that line that separates, for example, Canada and United States, that separates, let's say, Brazil from Argentina, that separate France and Spain, that separate Germany and Austria. Those lines are non-existent. So isolation is a fiction of political pride. It is so interesting to remember this and to see the world as it is, right? Without those lines. But he goes on, just like billions of other planetary families in the infinite universe, earthly humankind is a family of God. We are all children. If God is our Father, our Creator, or our Mother, as you may want to call God as Father, Mother, just like Francisca does when she prays for us. She prays for us in the beginning of our meetings. We are all brothers and sisters. We are all creatures of God. So if we call God our Creator, it's the Creator of everything. So we are a brother and sister to everything, to animals, to plants, to rocks, to planets, to stars. However, we isolate ourselves. So this paragraph is is very profound. We would need probably a whole hour just to talk about everything that Aniceto tells us here. But naturally, we don't have that time. But I highly encourage you to read and reread this paragraph. So, and if you have ideas, if you have anything to tell us, to say to us, to tell a story, send an email to us. Tell us what do you think about this paragraph? What do you think about war? Well, how do we really need war? How do we end war? He says, coming back here, Aniceto keeps saying, war needlessly causes discarnation in mass, and the individuals who die as a result of war will weigh on the spiritual welfare of the whole earth. So, one dies because of the war. If there's hatred in the heart of that person who died because somebody killed him, that hate will be echoing and will weigh on the entire earth. Just as if somebody dies and keeps trying to spread love, it will relieve a little bit of the whole earth. Well, we'll relieve the whole earth of a little bit of that weight that hatred causes. And he says, as long as there is discord among us, we will pay a grievous price in sweat and tears. War deludes the minds of all peoples, including a large number of centers in the invisible realms. So everybody is affected. Those who do not take up arms of destruction still use words and ideas of destruction, which is what we were talking about prior to this, right? Some people decide, I'm not going to war, but then they are at war with their ideas, with the way they speak, with the way they talk to each other, with the way they refer to each other. But, Aniceto continues, all of us will pay our dues. We will have our responsibilities. The divine law says that we are to understand and love one another. What is the level that we are right now when we think about how much do we understand and love one another? What is our level? Divine law says that we need to reach that point of understanding and of love one another. How are we? It's a personal question. Everyone needs to answer for themselves. But he goes on, everyone will suffer as a result of forgetting that law, but each person individually will be held responsible for the amount of discord he or she has personally brought to the worldwide family. As the result of a war, everyone will suffer because it's a collective happening, right? It's the country. So we will have our parcel of responsibility for the country, but we will be held responsible for the amount of stuff that I did, be it for the good or be it for the bad, be it for bringing peace or really striving and working to bring peace, or striving, sometimes really striving to bring discord, to bring hate among people or among peoples. Alfredo says that is only just, that, agreeing with what Aniceto is saying. As I said, we could spend a lot of time talking about this paragraph here, but we need to go on. After a long silence, and after Alfredo agreeing to what Aniceto was saying, Aniceto keeps going and says, well, last week I visited Alvorada Nova. We already spoke a little bit about Alvorada Nova. in the book No Solar, which is a spirit colony, and Alvorada Nova means a new dawn, literally. So he explains a little bit how it happened once the declaration of war was said, was spoken, right? And they prepared, and they said, well, we need to prepare for what's going on, for what's going to happen, and that we must bear on our own shoulders the weight of the entire production of the evil that we cause, just like he was saying before. And in other words, we are obliged to do our dirty laundry in our own quarters. So we are responsible for the dirty laundry, right? So for everything that we dirty, we need to wash it, and that's our responsibility. Why would I do something and then will be the other one who will pay for it? It doesn't make sense. So we are responsible for everything that we plant, just like Jesus said, right? You plant and then you harvest. That's how the law works. But sometimes we tend to forget about this, and we think that, oh no, I'm going to do it, and then there will be no consequence to this. And then the consequence comes, and then I complain. Why? Why would I complain if I did, right? If I'm planting discord, what do I expect to receive back? Well, Andres says that they all smiled at this comparison, right? Because, washing clothes, and it doesn't look like he's talking about wars and about discord, but hey, that's how it is. And a lot of people don't like to wash their dirty laundry, right? But we all need to do it, right? Or pay for a person to do it. So we have to work to get the money, and then ask somebody to do it, or pay somebody to do it. So anyways, we will have to do something. There will be a consequence, and we need to face the consequences of that. Up to this moment, Ismalia was silent. She was naturally paying attention to everything, but she was quiet. She was, I don't want to speak right now, but once she talks, she really talks. And as we've been doing for basically all the names that we hear and that we read on these books, right? I just want to mention that Ismalia comes from Hebrew, and I don't know how it's pronounced in Hebrew, but the meaning of Ismalia's name is God will hear. And that's why I find it very interesting the way she speaks, because she is, to what we can see by the first thing that she says here, she's a very evangelical person, right? She knows a lot about the Gospels, and she will say so many things in such a small paragraph that this one would be even harder to speak in an hour, more than what Aniceto said. So I'm just going to briefly touch in some points that she mentions here, so that you can go deeper in what she is saying. I'm going to read a little bit. Right? Unfortunately, and I'm going to quote, right? Unfortunately, in the collective sense, we are still like the Jerusalem of old, enslaved to error. Right? Jerusalem was where, the region where Jesus was there with all his friends, and all the stories, or a lot of the stories of the Old Testament and the New Testament, are around the same region. We all know that, right? But what is interesting is, she says that it's in the collective sense. So it's not only in the personal sense, it's in the collective sense. We are like the Jerusalem of old, enslaved. Enslaved. This word is very, very powerful here. Enslaved to what? The Hebrews were enslaved to Egypt, right? They were enslaved by the Babylonians once again. And apparently what she's saying here is that we are enslaved to error. It is interesting for us to think about this, right? Why do we get enslaved to error? Why are we enslaved to error? And then she says, every day Jesus heals us, and every day we lead him to the cross. It is as if, okay, he comes, I'm suffering, he takes me out of my suffering, I forget about it, and then I say, well, he is doing something wrong, and then I put him to the cross again. Our deeds are reduced to nothing more than recurring failures. What we do most of the time is do again the same mistake, commit the same error over and over and over again. We haven't left the training stage of experience. Oh no, let me try this. Oh, I'm going to train here. And then I train, make a mistake. And then, okay, now I know that I made a mistake. So let me do it again. And then I'm in the same mistake. And then I commit the same error. And then she comes with a lot of metaphors taken from the Gospels, taken from the books of the Bible, so that we can relate to them. And this is where I'm not going to be specific, because there would be a lot of things to say here. But I'm going to read and make a few comments on, just only, right, about some of these words. And unfortunately, we continue to practice politics according to the Caesars. The Caesars were the emperors of Jesus' time, prior to Jesus, a little bit after that. And for example, the Roman peace that the emperors decided to impose on that city. The Roman peace was called Pax Romana. And the Pax Romana was nobody can fight, nobody can raise their voices, it's imposed from the outside. And practicing politics also the same way. So this is just one example. So it's a peace imposed from the outside. What Jesus wants is a peace that he gives to us that comes from the inside. We're also practicing justice according to the Pilates, washing the hands, right? Oh no, I'm not going to condemn you, right? But they want to condemn you, so I wash my hands. Is that how real justice should be? That's a good thing to think about. We practice religious faith according to the Pharisees, which are the ones who read the letter, read the words, and then say, this is this, and I'm not going to change this. So, the stoning of the woman, for example, right? Cast the first stone, those who have not yet sinned. So, the law says that you can cast a stone. But Jesus comes with a different type of religious faith of practicing this. Priesthood according to the rabbis of the Sanhedrin, which was also the same way, right? This naturally is a generalization. What she's saying is that for the examples that we see, naturally there were good Pharisees, good Sanhedrin, good rabbis, probably good rulers, but these examples are very, very, very tough, and we all know them, right? Once we read, and because of our culture, the Jewish culture and Christian culture, we all know these examples. We practice belief, she goes on, we practice belief according to the Jairuses. Jairus was the man who asked Jesus to go there and cure his daughter because she was sick, and Jesus asked him to believe, and she will be healed. Apparently he didn't believe it. She died, quote unquote here. She didn't die. But so he believed, but at the same time, he believed because he went there to talk to him, because he knew that Jesus could do something. But at the same time, he didn't believe because she didn't get cured. And then she comes back to believe again when Jesus says, raise, right? And he says, Talitha Kumi, right? Wake up, and then she wakes up. So is this how we believe? Like believing and doubting at the same time? That's a good question. And also, business, we practice our business according to the Ananias and Sapphira. And for you that want to go and read a little bit about them, it's chapter 5 on the Acts of the Apostles, where Peter is talking to Ananias and Sapphira about how they handle their business. And it's a very powerful story. It's very hard to understand. It's very hard to grasp. There's a lot of people that have a hard time understanding it. But it's a very bad way of how to handle business and how to, how to give back to God what is God's, as Jesus says, and give to Caesar's, give Caesar's what is Caesar's, right? And at coming back to the text, Ismaiah finalizes, says, at this step, we cannot foresee the full range of implications of critical events. So if we keep practicing politics, justice, religious faith, priesthood, belief, and business according to the world instead of according to what Jesus teaches us, we cannot foresee the full range of implications of critical events. This is a lot to unpack here. Like I said, go and read it and go deep in each of these sentences. There's a lot to explore here. And she is right on the target. Let's think about not behaving according to the world. Live in the world, but let's really make an effort of not being of the world. It's a big, big difference. And then Andre says that he was enthusiastic about the explanations, and he ventured to say, but how atrocious destruction by war is. And Alfredo tells one of the most beautiful stories that I find in some of these first chapters of this book, that when he talks about prayer, if there's nothing else that we can do, prayer is a very good place to start. Let's not stop on praying. Prayer is the very first thing that we do, and we should do it along the way. But along the way, we should be doing something else to help other people. Because if we only pray and then go to sleep, well, prayer can help, but what about action? What about physically doing something? Right? So he says, and Alfredo says here, yes, war is atrocious. But at times like these, prayer is an intense light in the hearts of men and women. It is so true that the stars shine brighter on moonless nights. And he tells this story that he went to visit. He went with some friends in a mission over Bristol, right? That's in England. German bombers were flying over that city. The scene of destruction was really bad, really frightful. But when it was really dark at night, they see a beam of intense light that they could see in that darkness. It's not a physical light that people who are incarnated would see, but they, with their spirit sight, could see that light and say, wow, those rays flashed in the sky, in the firmament, while the bombs were hitting the ground. The head of the expedition suggested that we descend to the source of that luminous beam. So they go and see what's going on, why this light is coming from the ground. They were surprised to find that they were in a church. The sanctuary might have seemed almost dark to human eyes, but it was very bright 2 hours. Some brave Christians were there singing hymns. The power of prayer. During the war, they don't want to fight. What they can do? Probably inside that church, in that congregation, the priest, all the people who work there, people who live around, that maybe their houses were already destroyed. They were stuck. They didn't have any place to go. They went all to the church and they were singing together hymns of love. And then Alfredo describes that the minister of the worship service read a passage from the Acts of the Apostles that I just cited with the story of Ananias and Sapphira, where Paul and Silas were singing at midnight in prison, their clear voices rising up to heaven in notes of fervent trust. So the minister, remembering that situation of Paul and Silas imprisoned, they were singing at midnight. Right? They were praying with all their heart, putting all their love in that situation. Praying to God, singing to God, right? So that they can be together and send some love out in the world, into the world. While bombs were bursting outside, these disciples of the gospel were singing, united in a celestial vibration of living faith. Our leader, Alfredo continues, told us to remain standing before those heroic souls who brought to mind the early persecuted Christians as a sign of respect and recognition. Once we are in a situation like this, there is no religion. There shouldn't be any religion at any time. I mean, we can be in specific religions, don't get me wrong, but we are all brothers and sisters, as we already said. It doesn't matter if I believe in God or if I don't believe in God. It doesn't matter if I'm from that congregation or the other congregation, if I'm Jew, if I'm Christian, if I'm a Buddhist, if I'm a Muslim, if I'm an atheist. It doesn't really matter. We are all creatures, and we all share the same humanity. So it shouldn't matter, as a sign of respect and recognition. And even in more, brothers and sisters, once we are united by the problems that we all share. As a sign of respect and recognition, the leader told them to remain standing before those heroic souls. And then that leader sang along with the hymns and told us afterward that city administrators might construct anti-aircraft shelters. But these Christians were building anti-darkness shelters. It was all dark all around. They were building anti-darkness shelters. That church was an anti-darkness place for the ones who want to share their love for humanity, their love for all of us. And then he concludes by saying, Alfredo concludes by saying, sometimes it is necessary to suffer in order to understand the divine blessings. Like we said, we don't need to be suffering to know and remember that we are all brothers and sisters. Unfortunately, how most of the time we don't remember this, God provides us a way of remembering that we are all brothers and sisters. We have a lot of divine blessings at all steps in our lives. How much do we thank God for it? How much do we pray to God to say, God, I am here. I am your creature. Give me what I need so that I can learn how I am really your son, how I am really your daughter, but how, and most importantly, I am a brother or a sister to everybody that lives in this world. Hopefully, we won't need to suffer to understand the divine blessings. Hopefully, we already started our journey to understand these blessings. And I hope that we keep up with our journey of following Andre, Vicente, Aniceto, Alfredo, and Smalia through the next chapters of the messengers in our home. And hopefully you will join us again next week so that we can continue together marching towards the light. Have a great week, everyone.
Thank you for listening to Kardec Radio, broadcasting live every Saturday morning at 11 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Email us and share your comments at www.kardecradio.com. Until next time, we wish you many blessings.